Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 112 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week I have one update on a novel we talked about last week and 8 new reviews just for you folks at home. Of course, when I start off the show with the shout out to our latest Patreon supporter, we're getting new ones every week, it seems like. So thank you everybody for being such great supporters. This week's shout out goes to Mark Carlson, who has become our latest Patreon supporter at a Patreon page for the Geek Podcast. So it covers the Geek Podcast and it covers the LitRPG Podcast. If you want to go help support us, you can go head over there. And there are a lot of other ways to help support the podcast. You can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, thanks Mark Carlson for being a supporter who's like, hey, here's some cash. Do what you do. Thanks. Okay, new releases and reviews. We're going to be updating just a quick update on this particular story later on, Blind Gambit, and then doing some reviews, beginning with War of Aeternus 2, Sacrifices, then The Mists of Erantia, Realm of Arkon, book number 7, and then New Generations, Maelstrom, book number 1. And then after that, it'll be Questmaster, a LitRPG novella. And then it'll be Catmaster online, a LitRPG series. Then after that, it'll be Endless Online, all kinds of onlines. It's interesting. Endless Online, Oblivion Blade. This is the first of 2 books that were concurrently released. And then New Life Online, a LitRPG novel, and then Hunter NYC. So all these nice reviews for you, 8 more. Before we get into the reviews, we of course go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we begin with some entertaining stories here. Last week, Blaze Corbin did a live stream on his Facebook author page. It was a very entertaining thing to watch, especially if you've ever wondered how much he loves his knife collection. He's definitely willing to share that bladed love that he has for his weapon collection. And I've actually seen them in person, some of them. They are super, super cool to look at, but the man does definitely have a certain passion for his blade, as much as he does for his writing, I think, sometimes. But it's really interesting. He also goes into some details about his upcoming writing schedule, like things he plans to produce. So I definitely encourage you to go watch it. He's highly interactive with the audience, and it's very entertaining. He's also put out the first book in Delvers LLC series on sale. It's 99 cents for the next week or so. And I highly encourage you to go check that out if you haven't read it already. 99 cents is an amazing, it's like 500 pages, so it's like it's a really good read. It's a really like value read at 99 cents, definitely. So there you go. We'll link in the show notes for you if you want to go, of course, check that out. Okay, in other LitRPG news, Charles Dean just released the second book in his War Aeternus series. It actually came out, I believe, just the other day. And to celebrate, he's holding a YouTube event with some beta readers, some of his editors, and he's invited all the readers and to come and watch and comment and give him a hard time if you want to. He highly encourages you to have read the book. That way you guys can kind of like geek out about it if you're an enthusiast for the series. We'll have a link in the show notes to his YouTube page, which you can go subscribe to, and you'll get like a little notification when it comes up. But as of right now, the recording of the show, that particular event is scheduled for Saturday, May the 12th, on 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So there, I plan to be there, so hopefully I'll see you there too. Okay, now in some not so awesome news in our community, another wave of emails from Amazon went out this week telling authors that, quote unquote, we're reaching out to you because we detected reading or borrowing activity for your books originating from accounts attempting to manipulate Kindle services. You will receive royalties associated with legitimate or paid sales. However, we will not pay for reading activity related to illegitimate activity. Then there's also the usual inference that third-party marketing services may be to blame, but that, quote-unquote, any intentional violation of our terms and conditions, including a violation caused by a marketing service you or others on your behalf may have used, could result in account-level actions up to and including termination of your KDP account. This is kind of an automated letter that seems to have gone out to a lot of authors, not just in our community, but also in the romance community and in a lot of other indie author communities. The way that I've heard it described basically is that there are people who pay for services on the internet where their page reads get artificially inflated, like bots and automated services will automatically read page reads, increasing their Kindle Unlimited read numbers and increasing that author's payout, basically. When those accounts get busted, any other account that they've even looked at, anything they've done to hide their activity among other authors who didn't hire them, who had no idea that that's what they were doing, everything is taken down by Amazon, and those authors, even if they're completely innocent, essentially get a 1 out of 2 strikes against them. The second time it happens, again, whether it's with the author's consent or knowledge or reference, things get worse to the author. Like they can have their account suspended. Happens again, the account is likely terminated permanently. And it's just something that's outside of the control of a lot of the authors who are getting these notifications. Now, most recently, the wave has affected a lot of LitRPG authors, including G.R. Cooper, Lido Spirit Blackman, Zacharias Dracolis, Tom Hansen, J.R. Castelline, A.J. Chaudhary, and even myself. I wrote the Adventures of Terror series in Project Alpha. I got one of these stupid letters too, or emails, I should say. Which is weird to me because I don't even run ads. So I haven't contacted anybody to do anything like this. But I know it's also impacted a variety of authors in very different ways. Some losing hundreds of dollars worth of KU page reads. Some even losing all their page reads for an entire month. Personally, my April Kindle Unlimited reads got totally nuked. They're almost non-existent now. However, the hardest hit of the people that I know of are G.R. Cooper, who writes the Megaverse series, Little Spirit Blackman, Tom Hansen, who writes the Into Littleverse series, Jeff Sproul, who writes the Sigil Land series. Their accounts have actually been suspended, which means they can't access the tools that they use to update their books, to put up new books, to do sales, and sometimes not even be able to get their reports that they need to make business decisions. And that's the light version of that. A number of these same authors that I just listed have actually had their novels pulled from the Kindle Unlimited program entirely. And some of them even had their entire account suspended. All their books have been pulled from Amazon, so you can't even see them or purchase them or buy them. And some other authors even have their pre-orders that they've set up and scheduled out canceled. And so there's a whole variety of things occurring. And again, none of these authors, as far as I'm aware, have done anything wrong, have done anything inappropriate. And again, I'm one of them that's in the first warning stage. So I'm it's just too broad of a thing. Not everybody's can be doing this. This seems really weird and arbitrary. And again, it's just bad actors hiding their activities among good authors' works. Essentially, those automated services try to hide their activities, the things they're paid for, by also artificially reading other authors' stuff, which again they have no consent over, they have no notification of, they have no knowledge of it. And Amazon's recourse is eventually say, we're going to suspend your account unless you can prove that you didn't do this, which is hard to prove because you didn't actually do anything. So they're asking you to prove a negative in a lot of ways. And because of this, many authors are choosing to remove their titles from Kindle Unlimited rather than take the chance of getting their account suspended or even closed because of something some shady page reader service has done to them without their knowledge or consent. So this is, again, more of an informational update for the audience, for the readers, in that a lot of your favorite LitRPG authors are going through this particular situation, again, they have no control over. And some of them are, again, choosing to take their stuff off of Kindle Unlimited rather than take the risk of, again, losing their entire account, their entire ability to potentially make a living from their writing work. I myself personally, have kind of come to the decision that's what I have to do as well. Like a lot of my books already have been renewed automatically for Kindle Unlimited, so I can't take them out officially. I can just stop the automated part and let their terms of service finish up. But Adventures in Terror book number 3, which I'm currently finishing now, won't be on Kindle Unlimited, just because I don't want to take the chance of it being taken down in like the biggest month when it's released. And so it's going to stop some people from like reading that story potentially. But for me, it's kind of a decision I had to make, because otherwise I potentially lose my entire ability to write and to make a living, and that's my full-time job now. So these are just decisions. So if you, again, remember, support your authors that you love. You might not be able to read them in Kindle Unlimited, but you can always support them in other ways. A lot of times they have Patreons. You can always, of course, buy their books. That's always a great thing. But if you can't afford them, if they've gone wide, if they don't have to have Kindle Unlimited exclusivity, they may be able to, send you the books in another way, like through their Patreon or again, through private sales. Because again, now they're not limited to Amazon exclusivity, which is part of the Kindle Unlimited program. So again, support your authors that you love in any way that you can. They don't write without your support. And of course, if you want to let Amazon know that you don't like what they're doing, we have a couple links in the show notes where you can contact them, including Amazon customer service number if you're a phone person, or just a web page, a link in the show notes for feedback for Amazon. So all kinds of ways that you can go let Amazon know that you don't like what they do. Okay. Now, in more happy news, Daniel Scheenhofen, who is the author of the Alpha World series, Apocalypse Gates, Last Horizon, he has decided to go full time. What a great choice. No, I mean, honestly, it is a good choice, even though like this is a particularly unusual moment for our community authors. He put in his letter of resignation, and he says that he's going to be a fully fledged full-time author come May the 20th. So I want to congratulate him. It's a really big step. It really is. And I wish him the best. I'm personally a big fan of his work, and I've enjoyed reading all this stuff, and I've enjoyed every single conversation and author interview I've done with the guy. He really is a good person, and his work speaks for itself. Like if you like that series, you generally usually love it as well. So he also has a Patreon page if you want to support him in that way to help. It's one of those things like when you're an author, your income comes in like spikes and waves. Like it's not always consistent. And so having a Patreon base of supporters that are just kind of, even if it's like a little bit of money on a regular basis that you can kind of count on, it really does help assuage your fears of like, am I going to be able to pay bills this month? Or can I afford to keep being a full-time writer? So please go support him, of course, any way, shape, form you can. But he does have a Patreon page at DJ Scheenhofen on Patreon. So there you go. Okay, now talking about some things that are out now. Haven't reviewed them, but they are currently available. Want to make sure you're aware of them. Mightier Still by Tom Hansen, one of the authors we talked about who had been affected by this. It is out currently now. It's called Mightier Still, LitRPG, Enter the Lover side quest. As is Vasily Mihenko's actually latest novel in the Barleona universe. If you know Vasily Mihenko, you've probably read Way the Shaman, which is probably his most popular series. This is a new main character. This is a new story, but it's set in that same kind of game universe. He's written it with co-author Eugenia Dimitrieva. The two recently published a short story together in Your In-Game Book 2, which is a short story series I recently reviewed. It was a very entertaining read, to be honest. I actually liked it. It was another short story set in, again, Barleona, which is Vasily's world. But he's doing a co-author thing. So I'm kind of curious to see how this actually plays out, but I have good hopes. Like I said, I like their short story collaboration, so I'm hoping this one is as entertaining. Okay, also out now is Kayla Levon's Options, book number 2. And see also is The Song Maiden by Jonathan Brooks. Adam Drake, who writes the Level series, like Level 5, which is coming up soon. His novel entitled Bitch Berserker. So, not a fan of the title myself, but no judgments until, I actually get a chance to read it. But it does say in the novel description, this is a LitRPG title, and it is apparently pretty graphic. violence. So it's also a warning in his author description or novel description for the title. So there you go. New audiobooks that have come out recently. Super Sales on Superheroes 2 is out as an audiobook. This title has switched narrators. I believe the first one was Jeff Hayes. This book, second book in the series, is Nick Podell. And it's also published by Podium Publishing. So there you go. It's out now. We have a review version of the ebook in the links in the show notes, of course. Also, as an audiobook is Vasily Mahenko's Dark Paladin Book 3 series. It's called Restart. It's the third book in that series. And of course, link in the show notes for their ebook review. Also out now is Emeraldia Book 5 as an audiobook by Michael Chatfield. It's called This Is Our Land. We, of course, have a link in the show notes for that review as well. So go check these out if you're a fan of these as ebooks. You're probably going to be a fan of them as audiobooks, unless for some reason the narrator doesn't like click with you or something. But remember, you can also listen to samples before you buy. So there you go. Okay, on to upcoming LitRPG. This is just where I read off stuff that's coming out in the near future to let you know. There are a few new titles, but of course, you can feel free to skip ahead if you're not interested. Coming out on May the 11th, which is just tomorrow, is going to be Warrior Academy Tournament of Heroes, Episode 3. This actually might be out by the time you actually watch this. A lot of people watch this on a Friday when I record on a Thursday. But it is out then by Gabriel Wathwig. I'll actually be scheduling an author interview with a guy in the near future, and hopefully we'll get that out and you guys can enjoy that as well. He's a very quirky author who writes some very interesting stuff. It's always highly entertaining, but I know it's not everyone's cup of tea all the time, but I like them. Out on May the 15th, Goblin King, a LitRPG GameLit novel adventure monster slayer online book number 1. That's the title. Out again on May 15th. Out on May the 17th, World of Kark, book number 2. On May the 22nd, it'll be Gestation, Project Chrysalis, book number 1. This is a new series from LitWorld. So there you go. Out on May the 24th, God Mode, Alter Game, book number 3. May 27th is Kingdom Level 5 from the author we just talked about. Out on May 28th, Trial by Fire. It's the second book in the Areki online series. On May the 29th, this was a new, again, the introduction to a new addition to the list, is Defenders of the Realm, Greystone Chronicles, book number 4. That's right, Dave Wilmarth, the guy who wrote that middle book right there. He has the Greystone Chronicles series, and he's putting out the 4th book in that series on May the 29th. Also a very pretty cover. Okay, out on May the 30th, The Dead Rogue is going to be out. May 31st, Pangea Online. On May 31st, it'll be Atlas Reign by Riley Mercer. Haven't read it, but the author says it's LitRPG. Out on July the 30th, Restart, Level Up book number 1. This is one I'm actually kind of looking forward to. This is another Russian author that's been translated into English. I read a short story set in the same kind of universe, and it was actually rather intriguing. So hopefully this one will be as good. Also on the list is July 23rd. It'll be External Threat, Reality Benders, book number 2. I really enjoyed the first book in that series, so I'm looking forward to reading the second one. And last but not least is out on August the 7th. That's right, all the way out in August. It's May, June, July, August. It's called Death March, Euphoria Online, book number 1. So the author asked to be added to the list. He said it is LitRPG, so there you go. It's on the list. And that's it for upcoming LitRPG. On to new releases and reviews. That's right, I cut myself off. New releases and reviews. First is going to be just like a small update on a particular novel, Blind Gambit. I read it and had a reviewer prepared. It turns out not to be LitRPG as much as it is GameLit. It's this kind of coming-of-age story for a visually impaired young man who has to deal with the duality of being able to see in a VR game he plays, but being blind in real life. It's actually very fascinating. It's a very interesting real-life story that I kind of like better than like the game stuff, the game training and hacker part of it, which is the other half of the story. It was originally published with the descriptors A Game Lit LitRPG novel on both the cover and the Amazon title. Again, I read it, and I basically, while I liked it, I realized like this isn't actually LitRPG. Part of the story is set in a VR world, and there's this shooter game element story to it, but there's not really any RPG progression. Rather than give the novel that I actually liked a bad review for what seems essentially like mislabeling, I contacted the author and I'm like, this doesn't really seem like it's LitRPG. It might disappoint some readers if you keep that particular tag on there. It's your choice entirely. And he basically agreed. He's like, oh yeah, I planned to like originally launch it as GameLit because I kind of felt the same way. But my beta readers kept calling it LitRPG, so I figured, okay, I'll throw a tag on there, see if it lands. But after just talking to him, he was very happy to just say, oh yeah, I'll take it off. It's not going to meet reader expectations by calling it LitRPG. He took it off, and as of this recording, he actually has removed it from both the cover art and from the title on Amazon. So no need to give it a bad review. Actually, gave it a good review just because this is a nice story and it really is entertaining. It's a good story, just was mislabeled as LitRPG, so it's not getting like a review in the show because we review LitRPG here. But it was enjoyable for me at least. Okay, on to the reviews. War of Aeternus. Sorry, I keep saying of. It's just War of Aeternus. Book number 2, Sacrifices, written by Charles Dean. It is about 350 pages, I think. Again, there's no official page count. It just came out. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Desperate to save as many people as he can from a horrible fate in a cruel game of the gods, Lee and his small group of friends abandon the relative safety of Satterfield for the great city of Christian. Tensions within the city have reached a breaking point upon the arrival of an enemy herald, and Lee is soon caught up in the struggle for power. Captured, imprisoned, and forced to fight for his life on the blood-soaked sands of the Christian arena, Lee has to figure out how to survive long enough to mend the rifts in the broken city before it falls apart completely. Armed with new skills, joined by new allies, and up against the most dangerous enemy yet, Lee's bid for survival in the War of Eternity takes on even higher stakes as he learns what true leadership requires. With an ominous new threat looming in the distance and an army on the horizon, Lee has to answer one question: can he pay the price of victory? So there you go. That is the author's description. And I just realized like what that city's name sounds like when I say it out loud. I really just like been reading like, oh, that's another layer of like subtext to this whole story now for me. I've already read it. But I'm like, oh wait, that does mean something now. So there you go. We always learn something sometimes. I'm always happy to learn things. My review basically is really super short and simple. I had a good time with this thing. It starts off shortly after the end of book 1, that I had a nice review for anyways, with the core team trying to collect bounties to raise funds for their home village. They get to this new town, and things don't go well for them. And the novel, and this section of the novel essentially is really introduction to the larger world, because book 1 basically isolated them in this one kind of starter beginner town, and so they're expanding their influence and their knowledge of the larger universe, at least as far as the main character goes. And it doesn't look great for humans, to be honest. Like, there are a lot of different cultures and races and species that are coexisting, and powers is fluctuating in this particular new place that the characters go to. There's a lot of good fights in the story. There's lots of leveling, magical crafting. But for me, like, even though I liked all those things, and I really did, the best moments in the story didn't happen in combat. They happened when I felt connected to the characters. And there are several places in the story that I really liked. And I don't want to spoil them for you. I don't want to spoil the stories, but a lot of these moments are just like, oh, they're not RPG moments necessarily. They're moments where I'm learning about how the characters react, some of their backstories, and whether it's the main character kind of fumbling for romance, or like the touching background stories from other like secondary characters. Those were definitely some of my favorite moments. Like, everything else is, again, still good, but like these moments are like, oh, well, I feel connected to these characters, and it makes me want to see them succeed, and it makes me, gives me the feels about them. And I think that's important in that the author does some very interesting story, which I don't want to spoil, but by making sure you're connected to the characters, he adds a lot of depth to the story. And I think that's definitely a big improvement upon what book number 1 did. Book number 1, again, a lot of book number 1s have to set a broad foundation. But in book number 2, the author really does help you to appreciate more about these secondary characters, which is really good for me. Overall, I had a good time with the story. It has a really good balance of, again, action, RPG advancement, character development, and of course, just an entertaining story, so which is always a big thing for me. For me, gets a score 7 out of 10. I would definitely rate this if I was doing a sliding scale, probably along with like 5.7, 7.5, 7.6. Very entertaining story. So that's War of Aeternus. I keep putting the of in there. War Aeternus 2 Sacrifices with a score of 7 out of 10 though. So there we go. Had a good time with it. Okay, on to our next review, which is The Mist of Erantia, Book 7 in the Realm of Arkon series, written by G.A. Killa. Okay, this one is 303 pages, $5.99, not available on Kindle Unlimited. And again, that's just a choice of the publishers. Here's the author's description. Honestly, I'm understanding that choice more and more now. Here's the author's description. Roman was never supposed to escape the locked plane that was his prison, and yet somehow the impossible task becomes possible with the help of new friends, and despite the tricks of old enemies. Too intrepid was the demon driven by the fury of battle, the sorrow of defeat, the bonds of unbreakable friendship, and the longing for his beloved. But when gods themselves join the fray, the chances of victory fall from slim to none. Just until that to Roman, better known as Creon, the Prince of Arcadia, or to his friends, for their will to fight for their realm they now call home is inexhaustible, and fight they will to the bitter end. So there you go. It's a very interesting introduction. Okay, if you're a fan of the series, this is must read, obviously. You've probably already picked it up, but it is out. I kind of wish the story was in KU. At least I did when it originally came out. But it's really not one of those series you can kind of pick up midway through anyways. So also be aware that this one seems to have a few more technical writing translation errors than ones before it. It's definitely noted by not just myself, but also like other reviewers who picked this up. It's just one of those things you have to kind of accept with translations. Roman, Max, and his sister finally reunite in this story, and that's where the story starts off. It's a nice reunion, and it's sweet, but it's not as sweet as I thought it was going to be. I think at the end of the last book, in book 6, I thought, oh, they're finally together. This is not spoilery. It's in the novel description. And I thought, oh, this is going to be like a touching reunion. This is what we've been building up to for like 6 other books. Like the main character escaping the demon realms and getting back, finding his sister who's been so worried about him and his friend. I believe they uploaded their minds, so they're stuck there anyways. And I thought it's going to be this great reunion. They're going to go on adventures and have fun. And their reunion was a little more muted emotionally than I thought it was going to be. Like there's definitely acknowledgement of feelings and stuff. But they almost immediately get back to questing and going on and like following up like big plot point quest lines kind of stuff. And that just is what it is. I was like, oh, slight disappointment on that level. But they do hang out together. They do go on journeys and adventures, which I don't want to spoil for you, obviously. And the questing is, again, and the action is where the story kind of shines. Like, there's some seriously epic fights with like really good loot and really good quest storylines in here. And the thing about the gods in the novel description is not hyperbole. This is again one of those stories where like every novel tries to kick up the action and the adventure up a notch. And now they're hitting like god level kind of stuff. So I'm kind of curious to see how they're going to increase that again in the next novel. I'm not sure if they can do it without like making everybody overpowered or making like the epicness of this kind of overwhelm like the basic fundamental things that we all love. But I'm definitely curious to see where it goes. Overall, again, a good action-filled story with a very epic ending. I should warn you, the end does kind of have this cliffhanger-y thing kind of do with it. I don't think it ruins the story personally, but it is there. It bothers some people, which is the only reason I mention it. But for me, good story, entertaining, with a score of 7 out of 10. That's Mist of Erantia, Realm of Arkon, book number 7, with a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, on to our 4th review. It's going to be New Generation, Maelstrom, book number 1, written by 2 authors, A.K. Denick and Francois van der Hoel. So there you go. It is 269 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. A single look changed everything. It might have been the sight of blood in Caden's hands. It might have been when he laid eyes on the woman haunting his dreams. Forced against their will to work in a new world, Caden and Lainey will have to serve a wicked god and fight for survival every single day. An old foe to God Bardos appears and offers them salvation, where his offer save or kill them. This is Maelstrom, prepare to be changed. So there you go. That is the author's description of his novel. And a quick heads up on this. This novel has a lot of technical writing issues. I recommend you download a sample if you want to see if that's going to bother you or not before you actually purchase it. Of course, since it's Ink and Unlimited, you can kind of check it out for free or free-ish with the program. So there's no risk free there. But again, there's enough there that even my brain was like, oh, I noticed these things. And my brain is kind of been conditioned over the course of the years of reading so many LitRPG stories to kind of ignore a lot of small details. So just a heads up. Okay. Basically, this is a series of fights and dungeon dives, kind of held together with a kind of super vague plot to distract an evil god long enough to make him mortal. And that's kind of the fundamental premise of the story and what it is. It is LitRPG. There are RPG advancements with characters leveling, choosing new powers as they level. But it's kind of a very loose RPG system that almost seems to be made up on the spot as the story goes along. I feel like this is a Panzer story where like things weren't exactly plotted out in detail. And that's fine. That's just a way to write a story. It's neither good nor bad. But in respects to like the game mechanics of the story, like, oh, you can kind of tell like, oh, maybe this power, which is kind of thought of like, oh, this is cool, I'm going to add this here. And that RPG progression just feels a little made up sometimes. And if that's going to bother you, I mean, like I said, get a sample. You can tell very quickly whether or not this is going to be a story that you enjoy or not. And there's just an example. Early in the story, it's established that the players spend skill points and that they earn as they level or learn spells or abilities related to class. So in the game mechanic portion, there's like, characters level and they get skill points that they can use to learn spells or abilities. Great. It's also related to the class. Then a short time later in the story, the main character actually kind of wills a new power into existence that's not related to his class. Through like sheer imagination and active will, he creates a whole new spell. So at that point, I basically realized, so he never really needed those skill points, I guess. So that whole mechanic doesn't really matter if like a cool power comes up in the course of this run, or cool power isn't needed at any time or point. And again, it kind of just feels like this was just made up, which is again perfectly acceptable. It's a choice. I'm not criticizing them for doing it. I'm just saying that it didn't work for me in particular. On the side story, let's see, on the story side rather, there's not really one, I should say. I mean, there's definitely a lot of action scenes. There's kind of this loose outline of like purpose for the characters, like I already described it. The novel just starts out with this awkward transport to a game world beginning, and then drops the main characters into battle where they kill, they level up, they get new abilities, and they kill some more. And that's really what the story is throughout. There's kind of, again, this attempt to put a story into place between fights, with flashbacks and a plot involving a plot to bring down an evil god. But it's really just kind of an excuse to get to your next plot, to your next dungeon dive. And that's fine. Again, this is a very action-oriented story. The biggest issue for me, of course, was like the sheer number of like technical errors and issues in the novel. And like I said, if I noticed it, that means they're probably more than that other people are going to notice. So again, just a heads up, and also the writing style and the dialogue are kind of awkward. So that might bother other people as well. Overall, I kind of got bored in the novel. The fights, which are a major portion of the story, they're decently written. They are. The movements, the tactics, and the spells are interesting, and they're used in very interesting ways on a technical level. But overall, the fights felt like they lacked purpose. Like a lot of the fights felt like they were just there to be there. Like something for the characters to do, something for them to use to level up. And again, not technically wrong or any way, shape, or form. Again, the fights were well written enough, but their lack of purpose kind of made them unentertaining for him. Like the fights for just spike states are just not they don't really work. I like to feel like, oh, this fight means something. They're risking their lives for a reason, or they're murdering this thing for some purpose. And that just wasn't the vibe I got from the story. Right? And yeah, I actually tested it out. Yeah, that's silly news. I did test it out actually. After I read up to a certain lull in the story, I actually went back and looked at the last non-action scene and kind of compared, oh, can I just skip from here to here and skip all that action? I'm like, oh yeah, the story part doesn't kind of ignores a lot of the fight stuff. And the fights kind of ignore some of the story stuff that's kind of implemented. They feel like they're sometimes very separate entities that just happen to have like the same name characters in there. And like I said, it is what it is. If you're in the mood for something that just throws fight after you and like a serialized storytelling format, you might really enjoy this one more than me if you can look past some of the technical issues. If you can't, you might enjoy it less. For me, it was just kind of really in the middle there. I was like, oh, I couldn't really super enjoy it because of the technical issues and the fact that the RPG stuff didn't really feel coherent on a system level. For me, I give it a score of 5 out of 10. Again, if you just want something that's like fight, story, fight, a little bit of story, you might like this more, and that's cool. But for me, 5 out of 10 for the new generation. Maelstrom book number 1. That's a score of 5 out of 10. There you go. Nope. On to number 5. Questmaster, a LitRPG novella written by Jessica West. It is about 100 pages. I think as of this writing, it didn't have page numbers yet, but it is self-described as a novella. It is $2.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited either. Here's the author's description. An island adrift in a world gone to hell becomes an even smaller place when the weight of its future lands on one person's shoulder. None of the chosen in our recorded history have ever found a way off the island. This year, the task will fall to a new Questmaster. Curing the corruption shouldn't cost us humanity. That's part of the novel description. Okay. First of all, this is like really overpriced to me. I'm guessing at about 100 pages for $2.99. That's about 3 cents a page, which is about triple what I normally like to pay. And again, it's not in Kindle Unlimited, and it's around 100 pages. According to the front matter in the story, I should say, this was originally published as part of a fantasy and speculative story box set in 2017. And I also kind of doubt that this was written as LitRPG. There are no RPG mechanics in the story, and that's kind of the big clue. Rather, it feels like it's a speculative story that asks the question, what would happen if you trapped a group of people in an MMO for 6 generations? Like, how would that culture develop? How would it change? And how would their world kind of shift to like trying to get off that island and get into the bigger world? Because essentially in the story, nobody remembers that there's a world outside this game world. And so their concept of culture kind of really does shift around like this fundamental quest of like, oh, how do we leave this island? We haven't been able to do so for like 6 generations. And that's kind of the core speculative concept behind this story. Like, what if these characters are trapped in that MMO game for such a long time, they kind of forgot about the outside world. However, that's kind of the meta concept here. When I'm actually reading it, I kind of just felt like I was watching somebody play an MMO. Only there's no leveling, there's no stats, there's no item descriptions, class details, or any other kind of like RPG progression. Just people fighting, questing, and throwing out a lot of like gamer speak as they do so. Overall, again, not a bad story on a technical level, but it basically is not LitRPG, and that's kind of a big thing for me. So for me, it could score 4 out of 10. For Questmaster in the LitRPG novella, it's not actually LitRPG. Gets a score of 4 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to Catmaster by A.J. Chaudhry. It is 309 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Again, this is another one of the authors who got hit by Amazon letters. Here is the author's description. Meet Kitty, a cat in a VR MMORPG. What would it be like if you were left with only 1% of your memory? Kitty is about to find out. After being betrayed by a close friend, Kitty is down to level 1 with no knowledge of his past life. With the aid of a cat princess, he'll need to fight his way up the ladder to get to the final boss and save the world. More importantly, he must save his master. Along the way, he'll learn new spells, deal with mobs, go on epic quests, and level up. So there you go. This is a slice of life LitRPG story set in a game world where anthropomorphized animals rule. If you've ever read the Redwall series by Brian Jacques, then you'll have an idea of what this story is like. In this world, though it's cats and dogs that walk on two legs, talk, dress, and fight. The main character is a cat named Kitty, who is a character sheet, gets XP from quests, killing monsters, and basically goes on a bunch of adventures and eventually tries to help a cat princess. Overall, the fights are decent. The game mechanics are okay, but they're not particularly innovative. A lot of just like the same stuff you see in a lot of stories. And there really isn't much besides like the anthropomorphized animal part of it to kind of set it out from set it apart from other slice of life adventure stories. Again, not necessarily a bad story. It just really didn't land for me. And it's because of the animal part. Like I like animals. But it's hard for me to relate to a cat on two legs, I guess. And like the things that go into his mind. And like I said, the game mechanics weren't particularly amazing or special on their own, and the story itself was very slice of life, so that didn't really set it apart for me either. And so for me, it didn't really land for me. And again, that's okay. I like the author's work in general. Like I said, nothing really particularly bad about the story. And if you're tired of reading about like human characters, you might really actually like the story. You really might. It just didn't hit for me for whatever reason. So for me, it gets score 6 out of 10. Again, not bad, not even boring. It just didn't quite hit good, which is what a 7 is for me. So that's a 6 out of 10 for Catmaster Online, a LitRPG series. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review, Endless Online, Oblivion Blade, a LitRPG Adventure Book Number 1. Written by M.H. Johnson. It sounds like a dirty joke for some reason. Anyways, it is 330 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Limited. Here is the author's description. Val had returned from his last tour of duty, scarred in body and soul. Barely able to walk and drugged to the gills for pain, he thought his killing days were finally behind him. He couldn't have been more wrong. Endless Online, a hyper-futuristic game where players could truly live another life. Val loved the idea of starting over in virtual reality, but when someone he cares about turns up missing after chasing the same dream, Val quickly learns that Endless is no simple game. And if Val can't figure out the dark secret behind the realm of wizards, warriors, and intergalactic conquest, then it's game over for everyone. So there you go, folks. Again, 330 pages, $4.98 available on Kindle Limited. This story has, I don't want to say it has issues, but it's sort of confusing in places. I want to get into the details of that. First of all, you should know that this should probably be considered more of a serialized story or like a large story that was broken up into pieces. Books 1 and book 2 in this series are actually published at the exact same time. And for good reason. Like the end of this book just ends abruptly and it's picked up immediately in book number 2. And so if that kind of storytelling bothers you, like you need like some firm resolution at the end of every book, this isn't it. It does really feel like either a serialized story that was cut up into like 2 or 3 books, or like essentially like this really long, like 1,000-page book that was cut up into like 300 sections. And either way, it is what it is. So just be aware of that. The novel has a bit of an unusual beginning, and the premise of the story shifts around quite a bit. It starts out as a character development for like an injured soldier who's a gamer. Then it shifts into the cyber thriller thing. And then it shifts into portal fiction for the rest of the story. Like it's sci-fi fantasy universe with RPG mechanics that don't really feel like they matter to the story. And that's what most of the story ends up being. But like there's just like these really weird shifts in the storyline that feel abrupt. They're interesting. I'll give you that. But they really do feel like big tonal shifts. Like the author couldn't really decide, what exactly kind of story this was going to be as they were writing it. And like I said, it's just it's an author choice, which I don't criticize. But again, as a reader, I'm like, in one respect, it's like, I don't know what's coming. In the respect, like, I have no idea what's coming. And it can be confusing for some people. Now, having said that, I also think that this is a really well-developed story. There's a lot of character development for the main character before he's transported to the new world. There are scenes that do this in flashback form later in the story, but they, to me, feel like they interrupt the sci-fi fantasy world storyline. So while they're interesting again, they really do feel out of place in a lot of ways. The sci-fi fantasy world has really deep lore, politics, histories, defined relations between like magic and technology. There's a lot of world building that goes into the story, which I'm a big fan of. However, also the secondary characters in the story have unique and interesting personalities. So it's not just like the main character who's interesting. The other characters, like later on again after he portal fictions, they all have personalities. They'll have histories. They'll have particular relations with each other and reference points for the main character. And so this, I can see like a lot of interesting story potential in those relationships. And also the action that's in this story is well done. Like it's really interesting. It's really like it grabs you and it kind of keeps you there during the action scenes, like top-notch stuff there. But fundamentally, because the RPG mechanics in the story don't feel like they have an impact on the story, it really lessened my enjoyment of it as LitRPG. I'm going to give you some more specifics in a second, but it's going to be a little spoilery. So if you just want to know, this one gets a score of I believe it's a 6 out of 10. Yeah, 6 out of 10 for me. So you can skip ahead of the next review if you want to. But I'm getting into a few more spoilers just because I feel like a few more details need to be given if I'm not going to give this a good review. So there you go. Your spoilers ahead, folks. Okay, now speaking of shifting premises and story, the beginning of the novel starts out with a scene where the main character I think it's Valor, is playing an MMO with his friends. He's playing an MMORPG on a computer screen. He's seeing everything happening, and it's like a fairly long scene in context of the rest of the story. And ultimately, it's absolutely meaningless. And again, not a badly told, essentially short story, but in the context of the rest of the story, like it literally has no meaning whatsoever almost. Like essentially there are two things that are established by this thing. One, the main character establishes gaming cred. But again, it doesn't mean a darn thing because he never plays another game in the story. He never uses gamer logic. He never uses any like the skills he learned as an MMORPG player. So again, it's pretty meaningless. Now, the only thing that does matter that was established here is his connection to a girl that later on goes missing in the story. And again, that's not spoilery. It's in the novel description. And she's the focus of like I want to say like middle section of the novel, like between like, I want to say 15 and 25-ish percentage. And the main character is essentially contacted, because he's a former soldier. He's contacted to try to help find out where she is. And like their last clue is like, oh, she signed up for this weird video game MMO beta testing called Endless Online. Again, that's in the novel description. It's not spoilery, but the main character is recruited to kind of infiltrate this company and find out what's happening to this girl. And this section of the story, like this, like I want to say early middle part, really does feel like cyber thriller. So it's just from like, oh, character development from a former soldier who plays MMOs to, now this is a cyber thriller. And that goes on for a while. And there's some really cool scenes in that section. There really are. And I thought that part was well done. It surprised me on several levels. It didn't follow like the traditional tropes of a cyber thriller necessarily, but it was like very interesting. Still some kind of Jason Bourne stuff happening there. But then at the 27% mark, it shifts like hugely. Like it really does like shift direction almost like 90 degrees in some respects. It goes from like the infiltration part to like portal fiction, like sci-fi fantasy portal fiction. And it's like a really big shift in the context of the story. Like up until this point, up until like the 27% mark, Endless Online, the game they've been talking about, has been presented as this full immersion virtual reality world where characters can log in, and it's like the best game ever. People can progress in an RPG fashion as much as they want to. Everybody understands this. And then it turns into this portal fiction, science fiction fantasy. I keep saying sci-fi fantasy because on this world, science fiction, like pew-pew lasers, spaceships, coexist with magic, like throwing fireballs and psychic powers. And it's all kind of mixed in. So I keep saying sci-fi fantasy for that reason. But what doesn't really happen for the main character, or I say for this larger world, there aren't RPG mechanics on this world that affect everybody. Like for the most part, the RPG mechanics are really just for the main character and the things that he kind of sees in the world, and the way and the RPG mechanics only really apply after the main character does something interesting or insightful or something. I'm going back to the story a little bit. Once he's on that world, it really is just kind of this slice of life portal fiction. And the main character hooks up with some mercenaries and Tomb Raiders, and they explore how the universe works. And you get a bunch of like good character detail and world building stuff, and all that's really nice. But basically, they go on some adventures, and I'm being vague because the adventure part is interesting, and I don't want to spoil that for anybody. But it really just feels like this slice of life adventure once he gets to this portal world, which is very much in line with portal fiction, but again, the RPG stuff, it doesn't really impact anybody, or even like the story for the most part. And I'll talk about the RPG mechanics right now. Once the main character gets to the game world, Endless Online, again, it really just does feel like science fiction fantasy story with game notifications and breaks for leveling. That's never really acknowledged in the larger context of this world and this story from now on. I'm going to be perfectly clear. This is LitRPG. It really is. There are levels gained, there are skills learned, there are skill increases, and stats go up after leveling for the main character. So like the minimum requirements are meant for like most people's definition of what LitRPG is. But for me, a lot of that stuff really felt like it was added on to this portal science fiction fantasy story. Like it really did feel like the game mechanics took second wheel to like this sci-fi science fiction fantasy story. And again, I don't know if it's intentional, the author, whether like they wrote the sci-fi fantasy story first and then added in game stuff, or like added like little spaces to add it in later. But it felt like that was the primary focus of the story, and the RPG mechanics really didn't feel like they mattered, except to like give informational stuff about, oh, the main character learned a spell, or he did a psychic thing. Here is a notification about like, here's an appropriate, and again, the work went into like making these detailed and interesting powers and descriptions and notifications. But again, ultimately, a lot of time in the story, they're not even acknowledged by the main character. Like sometimes it is like, oh, he sent us a psychic thought and reads a notification. And other times there's literally like pages and pages of notifications. And afterwards, the main character just goes on in the story like none of that ever occurred. Like he doesn't see it, or it doesn't impact him in some way. And it's very much an off and on kind of thing. And for me, again, this is an entertaining science fiction fantasy story. It just feels like that game stuff doesn't really matter, or like it was a secondary thought to the story. And again, that's just a choice. As far as like it's a writing choice. So there you go. Overall, again, I like the portal fiction aspect of the story. Like I said, entertaining. I also like the cyber thriller part at the beginning. It was kind of confusing that they are in the same story. Like they don't feel like they mix. It's a very awkward transition to the story between cyber thriller and portal fiction fantasy. But again, it's entertaining. And if you think of it as science fiction and fantasy portal fiction, like it really is. But when I looked back at my experience with the novel, after I'd finished everything and looked at my notes, and I thought of it in the context of a lit RPG, like there wasn't that same satisfaction that I get from a good lit RPG story that makes me feel like I'm in my favorite RPG game or my favorite tabletop game, or like these game rules matter to like this larger world, and like and that satisfaction just wasn't there for me. So what I really liked about the story just really wasn't RPG related at all. Which honestly just felt kind of was tacked onto the story. Whether that's actually the case or not, I don't know that it is, but that was kind of the vibe and the feel that I got when I was reading this story. So as portal fiction, as science fiction fantasy, it would get a 7 out of 10 for me. It's entertaining. But as lit RPG, like I didn't have the same satisfaction. And so if you like game mechanics, or game mechanics that don't really matter to the story, or if you just want an interesting sci-fi fantasy portal fiction story, this may work really well for you. But as lit RPG, it just didn't land for me. So for me, it gets a score 6 out of 10. That's Endless Online, Oblivion's Blade, book number 1, with the score of 6 out of 10 as lit RPG specifically. Book 2 is out as well. I wasn't interested enough to kind of read book 2, to be honest. It's just like, as LitRPG, there's a ton of other stuff for me to read that is more like grabs me and just like, oh yeah, this is great. But again, go for to read books 1 and 2 if you're looking for something different. There you go. On to our next review. New Life Online, a LitRPG novel written by Jordan Cross. Very pretty cover. And that's probably the nicest thing I'm going to say about it. It's 560 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. If you lose in the game, other people will die in real life. Would you play it safe? Finn's life sucks. He spends his days in the world's most advanced VR game, chopping wood in a wealthy player's base camp for a few copper coins a week. Leveling up is the latest thing on his mind. Is the last thing on his mind. When Celine, the girl he's grown to love like a sister, mysteriously disappears, both in real life and in the game, Finn is shaken into action. He is determined to find her. If only his character weren't so darn useless. The developer's challenge couldn't have come at a better time. It offers a new life in a new life in a new world, but there is a catch. The standard rules of the game don't apply, and only 3 things are certain. Everyone starts at level 1. The monsters are unlike anything any player has seen. Death comes at a higher cost. So there you go. That's the author's description. And the writing level is not as good as the description, I'll say. From the very first sentence of the story, you can tell that this novel has a lot of technical writing issues. And it does. That's probably the biggest thing that you're going to see in the beginning of the story that you're going to recognize. There were immediately issues with like inconsistent tenses, incomplete sentences, super awkward phrasing in sentences and in dialogue. And it really stands out. In the first, I'd say 20% of the novel, it's a consistent and noticeable issue. The author describes things in that first 20% like super factually. And like the main character essentially it's described this way. It's like, I did this, then I saw that, then I did this other thing, and then she did this thing, and then she said this thing, and it feels very stilted. That actually feels very natural. It's not particularly descriptive either emotionally or visually, and it doesn't really, it's not almost written in the first person tense. So one of the things about that particular tense of storytelling is that you get the opportunity to see and feel and through the main character or whoever's telling the story's perspective. And so you can see in details the things that they see. You can feel what they feel, whether it's emotionally or physically. And you get to use the main character's senses in a great detail potentially to capture the reader and make them feel like it's their story that they're seeing, like they're experiencing those things. And that's just not really exploited. It's not really used in this particular novel in general, but like super much not in like the first 20% of it. Like the first 20% of the novel is like it's a challenge to get through. And while the novel's writing gets better after that point, it doesn't really get good. The novel really just kind of hits this medium level of like, meh, for most of it. The game stuff is pretty standard once he actually gets there. The game mechanics are like, level stats, health percentage, item descriptions. That's kind of it. No real depth there, no real innovation, which is fine. You don't need it to be LitRPG, but those are things people look for, and making those things make a novel special. It makes the story more interesting if they're there, and they're just not here. Story-wise, the main character and his friend live in this kind of dystopian future where they get to have to pay an inherited debt and have jobs as hirelings in an MMO working for this guy. They log into the game, and their low-level characters do stuff like kill boars or cut wood, and that's how they make their living. Apparently, it's not really fully fleshed out. One day, they get the chance to like use their boss's high level of character, and they make some purchases for him. Only the main character makes some unauthorized purchases that lead him to land in his game contest with his friend's life potentially being lost. Like he's looking for his friend who's disappeared for the last couple of weeks, and he thinks she's in the game, like trapped somewhere or something. And from there, the story just kind of abandons that story premise a little bit for a while, for most of the story, I should say, and it becomes this slice of life, puzzle solving, adventure, action story that's only just like kind of mediocre. Overall, some of the story was like really hard to get through, the beginning especially. The storytelling in general is on the dry side. There's also, again, consistent technical writing issues that's going to make this a challenge for some people to read. And honestly, a lot of the story, especially the ending, is super wand wavy, and it doesn't end satisfying to me, at least, because it's a very one-wavy ending. The main character gets a reward he doesn't deserve, and there's this twist that just like, it's not foreshadowed at all, and it doesn't make contextual sense in the terms of like what's been developed in the story previously. I feel like it's just there to like say, oh, the main character now has reason to go back in the game to solve this problem in book number 2. And it just kind of bothered me. So for me, in general, kind of a mess storyline plus the technical issues and like the one way the ending and this with a bunch of other stuff made this less enjoyable for me, so much so that I did not enjoy it. It gets a score of 4 out of 10 for me. That's a new life. It's New Life Online, a LitRPG novel with a score of 4 out of 10. I just didn't have a good time with it. Okay, on to our last review. It is Monster Hunter NYC, written by Harmon Cooper. Also a very, very pretty cover. And one thing I kind of want to mention about this is that the cover kind of implies like this harem series. Like the official title of the novel, I think, is Monster Hunter NYC, a harem adventure story. The harem's not really there. Like it really is 2 girls. They're pretty, and there's definitely kind of a harem-ish vibe at the beginning of this novel, but it's really not a harem story. It's him. It's more like a Pokemon Persona 4 inspired capture story, and to me that's better. Like I was kind of uncomfortable reading it when I thought it was like going to be a harem, and thankfully it does switch away from that very quickly past the beginning part of this novel. Here is the details. It's about 300 pages, I believe. Again, no official page count. It just came out today. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. There were other broke musicians in New York City, but at least those ones had their dignity. It was my bandmate Iris who gave me the code that unlocked the illegal Monster Hunter app. Tears in her eyes, Iris said the app would help us fix our ravaged music equipment, make money, and live better lives. The Monster Hunt app, made me the alpha of 2 powerful huntresses, one of a half-dragon female, fond of combat and banter, the other a cute warrior fond of reading spellbooks and wielding 2 blades. Our goal? Hunt mythical creatures in the parks, rooftops, and back alleys of New York City, build a fighting party to compete in the brawls and tournaments, and earn some seriously needed cash, and try our damnedest not to get arrested. So there you go. Here's the review. Story-wise, it's pretty simple and straightforward. The main character gets access to an app that lets him capture monsters and train them for use in tournaments where he can win lots of money to further his music career. He's joined by his friend Iris and 2 hunters, Aya and Lady C, and it's really just a bunch of fights and some like resource management stuff until the tournament, and then it's kind of focuses on fighting. There's a little bit of story and interpersonal relationship stuff, but it's again mostly about the monster capturing and like the combat stuff. That's all it has to be. There's again not a lot of like super deep story stuff, but like the interpersonal relationship issues between characters is enough for me, like to keep the story kind of going. Game mechanic wise, the story pulls from like monster capture games. If you've ever played Pokemon Go or Persona, or like a lot of other monster capture games, you're going to find a lot of things that are familiar here to you as far as the game mechanics go. In this particular context of the story, it's an kind of AR Pokemon Go aspect in that the main character, he presses a button on his app on his phone, and he's transported to this world where he's picked up by 2 huntresses. There is some, if you're a fan of Harmon Cooper, you're going to notice some hints and Easter eggs about his other larger Proxima Universe series. But if you haven't, you don't need to. But essentially, he gets 2 huntresses who choose him as his alpha. It's all kind of a title thing. He's just their leader. And they're supposed to help him capture monsters so that he can train them and build up a dojo and like do some combat stuff and a bunch of brawls. And it's a very like action oriented story. The RPG side of this comes in the form of like levels and attacks and defense values that all the characters have and can improve through training or just from like the main character kind of leveling in its own like contextual way. There are like a lot more like monster capture mechanics here that I'm kind of gloss over, because part of the fun of this particular story is that kind of seeing how the author is incorporating the RPG mechanics from those kind of video games into his story. And it's something that's kind of gradually revealed as the story goes along. But again, it's entertaining and it's fun. There's also an experimental music component to the audiobook version of the story that's being developed by Jeff Hayes and Soundbook Theater that I'm really actually looking forward to listening to, because in the story, the main character is a musician, as is his bandmate Iris, and they're friends, and they both do this monster capture hunt and everything. But there are several places in the novel where they do this, where they're singing and where it's described in text like, oh, the lyrics of the song. And then what I'm thinking is going to happen, this is purely speculative, I don't really know, is that during the audiobook, the Jeff Hayes and the other narrator are actually going to sing these songs, like the full-on version of these songs in the audiobook version of this novel, which I think is a very interesting and experimental addition to the story. Like, you're adding extra value to the audiobook version of this novel by actually having like this full on like musical component to it, which is rather unusual for storytelling. Like the audiobook becomes extra special because it almost has this bonus feature that the novel version doesn't, which I think is really cool. I also know that Jeff Hayes is considering like actually doing a full on like novel, playlist, or I forget what the music term is, but like, series of songs, a whole album relating to like this novel, which if he does is, I totally plan to buy, because I've listened to one of the songs, and we actually showed it last week on the show. One of the songs that Jeff Hayes is producing for this novel, and it sounds really catchy. It's really cool, and I want to, of course, support the people in this community. So that's kind of a cool thing, a cool add-on to this particular novel. Going back to the actual review of the story, though, overall, it's a good read. Interesting story that brings Pokemon kind of like monster battling, capturing tournament systems into the story. I think it's a very interesting take on LitRPG in that, again, the author is doing something experimental. He's not just doing the same traditional kind of RPG fantasy stories. He's pulling something from other genres that still use RPG mechanics. And I definitely got to give him credit for being original in that respect. Again, the additional aspect of like, oh, music in your audiobook or music as like this side thing is also interesting to me. Again, the harem stuff in the story, it comes out a little bit in the beginning of it, but again, it's not really part of the story. Like, it really isn't. Like, there's like some flirting. There's no sex in the story at all. There's definitely like maybe some joking around with it, but it's minimal, like super minimal harem stuff, if you want to think about it that way. And most of that happens in like the first beginning part where he's describing them as like, oh, these are some hot chicks, and then it kind of disappears from the story entirely. So if you're looking for like a super haremy story, this isn't it. But at the same time, it's not super haremy, so I definitely think it'll appeal to a lot more people than other stories. For me, get the score 7 out of 10. If I'm scaling this thing again, it's probably along the lines of like 7.2, 7.3. Interesting stuff. A lot of interesting things here. Good story, entertaining, good action stuff. But the thing that probably stops from getting like a slightly higher score in that 7 range is just like the main character feels like he's watching a lot of these battles. And that's kind of the nature of monster capture stories, and that the main character kind of stands there and yells out commands and watches other people do things. That's not the entirety of the situation. Like, the main character does involve himself in battles, but it's a lot more rare. Like, a lot of time he spent watching and like or like giving orders, and that's fine. That's just, again, the type of game mechanics that this is pulling from. But for me, it's like, oh, okay, that's neat. It just makes it a little less involved with the main character. But again, small super tiny point. Again, good score. It gets a 7 out of 10 for Monster Hunter NYC, and that's it. We're done. That's the show, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for hanging out with me, for letting me blather on about all these LitRPG stories that I've read, and some of which I loved and some of them I didn't. Remember, though, if you want to follow us, you can find out all the ways to do so. We have links to everything in our show notes: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube page, Patreon, our webpage. Feel free to go look at them all. So one of the easiest ways you can support the podcast is just, following us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. We do a lot of like interesting different things in all those different contexts. And of course, if you want to help support the podcast on a financial level, use the links in the show notes. All the affiliate links we have in there, they help, even though they're like little pennies that we get from Amazon for every time you click on them, or like you buy something from Amazon, and it's not costing you anything to use them. Those little pennies add up and they help cover the cost of the show. Or you can become a Patreon subscriber. A lot of great ways, and some interesting rewards if you do that, if you choose to support us in that direction as well. There also have links in the show notes for all the good Facebook groups. So enjoy each other. If you want to find out all the ways you can support the podcast, you can find out them at litrpgpodcast.com/support. There you go. So much stuff. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for hanging out with me, letting me be a part of your lives as we talk about this thing that we all love, which is LitRPG. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.